They're ferocious things, and there are at least two major species that both carry. Black, which is kind of talked about as being a household rat or domestic rat. Not as big as the brown rat. They actually occupy different strata because they'll kill each other if they come across each other too much. And usually the brown rat being bigger and also fierce wind. Story there. But what happens is pneumotic plague increases mortality rates so much because of its extra ways of transmitting, as you point out, to people by these bloody spittoon, and it's air droplets.
That's why in like old pictures you see those weird old peaks and like and like goggles. They put herbs at the bottom. They believe that the plague would hit the herbs first, and it would be okay once it got to your,
That's part of it, but undoubtedly it must have been too the smell.
Yeah.
The decaying corpses. So that kept that. And remember the flowers? Remember the song? Little ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies.
They put posies in their pockets.
Ashes, we all fall down. Directly descendant of European folklore and children folklore from the 1300s.
And I don't know if you've ever read The Gods of Eden by William Bramley, but he actually refers to the plague, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but he refers to a lot of our diseases possibly happening from extraterrestrial places. There was actually a few in this book that I did see. It says that at the edges of town they saw people in cloaks, and then this is when the plague hasn't hit that town. They see these people at the outskirts of their city in cloaks just looking really, really horrible, and they get the plague. There was also another times where they see these people with scythes spraying, what they say is like, hacking away at the fields, and then once again the plague happens. They're starting to think that maybe, he's, assuming that maybe something actually happened, outside of us, outside of, anything. But it was kind of creepy to actually read, but I didn't really go too much into it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's anybody have something to add on just this issue what we're talking about? The other form is septicemia. It's very deadly. Within 6 to 8 hours, you're dead. And that just travels directly if you have a cut or something and direct into the bloodstream. You're fat. So there were all these millions that died. There's been always a question: why was it so lethal? Now let me give you, because this isn't in your book, just an additive here. Maybe 2 years ago, British bioarchaeologist, paleopathologist, excavated huge burial areas that we knew from historical records passed down were where many of the England, who had the mortality rate, somewhere, I think your book mentioned it, but somewhere between 50 and maybe even 60% of mortality rate in England. So they got these big graveyards, and they did a whole bunch of excavations trying to determine the genetics of this. Was it so much of a greater virulent form of Yersinia pestis, or what? And what they found is there was very little difference between that and the modern version. Not enough to account for that lethalness. And you do know we had an outbreak here every once in a while. There was a geologist, it was when I first moved here, so it would have been 2003, temporary movement. A geologist was working in New Mexico, out in near what is the marmots, prairie dogs, rabbits, a whole bunch of rodents can carry these things. And interestingly enough, in these natural reservoirs, it does not kill them, but rats it kills. So as the rat dies, of course, the fleas jump. I think I read somewhere up to a couple feet they can jump.
Yeah.
And when you're in this close relationship and this poor housing and people sleeping, wherever, you can see how that passed along. But in terms of its virulence, then we're back to base A. Okay, if it wasn't that, the genetic form, what are we looking at here?
Poor hygiene.
Poor hygiene, so many infections.
The knowledge that they had was so limited, and it was so tied to religion and supernatural beliefs that. But the biggest thing would be hygiene. There was no knowledge of any microbiology and
Okay.
any existence of any form
No,
of.
this isn't particularly in the reading, I don't think, but the
Yeah.
point we're kind of getting at here. Well, if you go back to your model, I don't have it handy, but you guys probably do. And if you look at that model, there's a, let me see, Sierra, just that top one. Yeah, if you look at the top one, this one, if you have it handy. Okay, so we have the agent. We know the vector is what? Growth. In other words, a transmitter.
Rodents and fleas. Oh wait. I don't know. No. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was like, it's fleas, right?
Yeah.
It's the vector.
So we got that. Their behavior, we know they can jump.
They can survive
The
by
host is the intermediate host is the rat. Okay. But now we'll go down to humans. Along with what Sierra was saying, nutrition.
Yeah.
There was a huge population that kind of exploded in the early 1300s. Life was good, so to speak, and even though the manners were working people half to death and stuff, it did see a population growth. And there's a lot of discussion about the nutritional level. That might have been one of the big areas, along with, of course, hygiene. The other thing is, I read somewhere, and I don't know how they can assume this, but in one of my other books, I talked about that mnemonic form is only about maybe accounts for 12 to 15%. I question how they did this and to get at that, because this is so much more lethal and passes on along with the fleas. I mean, both things are going on. That apparently counts for a lot of its killing and its fastness,
Well,
and that many people gone.
But they do talk about
Oh,
in the book
Okay.
when people got so violently ill so quickly, people avoided them.
Yeah, yeah.
And you
some
can
did.
avoid a person with a respiratory transmittable disease, but the fleas, which would transmit the
wouldn't have
move
known
on a
about.
plane, you wouldn't have known about.
They
So
did
you-
not know about fleas
Like
jumping.
Poland
did
was
they?
isolated for the most part because they just were isolated and they didn't get hit like.
As much.
So it may have been that when they saw,
Mhm.
I mean,
Somebody coughing up blood, they tried to avoid. At least
plus
some
if you
people did.
had, I mean, they may have kept a lot of this covered
Yeah,
and
they did.
you didn't realize that somebody was sick, but the mnemonic version was violent enough that.
Could be
you know.
incubated and
So there may have
spreading
been
out. Yeah, I agree.
the minute they saw somebody sick, that maybe the whole family was avoided, you know.
You haven't had a chance to jump in.
Oh, what were we doing with the pages?
Yeah, well, we'll go back and forth.
I don't know.
Anything you want to add on to your section?
I just thought it was weird that they all thought this was the Armageddon, like the end of the world. They thought it was just dinosaur, and that was all religious aspect. 'Cause, oh yeah, everybody was religious. Everybody. And they thought it was like God punishing them for certain things, and like just an
Well, for sinning, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, what else? Well, if you know, powers are always greater than you. That gives religion its strength, and you know, rain comes, sunshine, crops fail, don't fail, you know, whatever. That's what all traditional religions. If you follow modern religion out in detail, many of the rituals are connected to that. I see it more as an anthropology because I've worked with people that are pre-literate, if you want to call them, or post-literate. But among Mayans, for example, so many of the rituals are all to do with agricultural society. I mean, that's the basis of that. And so if you start seeing these things, what would you think? What did we do?
Yeah.
You start sacrificing even people in some places, and we certainly find that in the mummy data that we'll talk about in a little bit later in Peru, where clearly we have good data about environmental shifts and real danger shifts of drying up, and it's correlated with sacrifice of llamas, mountain lions, and they're preserved in this form of embalmment that they did with them, mummified, along with children in some cases. So when you start seeing that, yeah, that makes some. What did we violate? You know, we did some taboo. If you've got a lot of taboos, it's bound you look back and God,
Yeah.
I did that. that must be why, you know, I mean, there's guilt, there's all kinds of things you can't control, situations you can't control.
And like also, I think what made the people go into even more mass hysteria is that they realized that the disease hit everybody. It hit their nobles. It hit everyone. It doesn't matter.
No discrimination.
No discrimination.
Yeah.
Exactly. It just full blown doesn't matter. And I think that's what scared them because they believed that, you know, the nobles would never get sick, and you know, you see them just falling dead. I think that's when they just sort of like, oh god.
And interesting enough, when we get to talking about the effects that this had in society and actually technology and those kind of things, improved houses and ensuing plague. Remember, plague broke out. The first one your book talks was Justinian in 500 something, Constantinople, the Roman ruler during his period, and he died from it. But all that, so there are long series of those. And as I started saying, but jumped around, this geologist in New Mexico was out, and he got it from prairie dogs apparently, and flew back east. He was from Maine, I think, at the university. Died because they didn't recognize it back there. Here, some Navajo children periodically get some light doses of it, but they know right away, and antibiotics will fix it up. I don't know the specific one to use. Pardon? Plague.
Oh no, I just asked.
Bubonic.
Oh.
Yeah. So, but this guy died, and this was about 2003, something like that.
That's too bad.
And they didn't recognize anything on him because he had flu-like symptoms to begin with. And, go ahead, Joe.
Miss Pardue, one at the Fremont campus, says she had a nephew that had the same thing. I think in like 05 or something like that. That even the doctors here didn't recognize. They say it's really hard to diagnose because a lot of the symptoms look like
crossover with
yeah. Well, like you're a nurse. I know I went through EMT school, and I remember I had an appendix. It happens with a lot of things. Like I got a sex, and it's real easy to cover things up, you know.
Mimicking stuff.
So you don't take it seriously. Next thing you know, you're.
I had another
Go
question.
ahead, sure. Or comment.
This was
Add to
earlier when you were looking at the.
This is the idea. This is where you get.
You mentioned something about nutrition, and I missed your point. What was it that you were trying to?
Poor nutrition, poor immune system.
Oh, I see.
Response.
All right.
And all it takes the first few days, if you're in bad shape, you know, you can't fight much of a response.
Right.
Some biological details. And again, you don't have an exam on this, but it's my job, and I feel, to impart some of these things. Some of these bacteria and viruses are very sophisticated, of course, in terms of their forms and over many times trying to make their living. Remember the very first day we had up here, how they get transmitted and the complexity. Well, it turns out Yersinia pestis has a couple surface proteins that help protect it right away. One of them is that it protects itself when it invades the body against the macrophages, so they can't. That's your first immune response. It engulfs it up and takes it in and destroys it. It protects against that action. The second protein produces a toxin that kills all the surrounding cells and allows it to go to town. And then it has a third thing that just breaks up your clotting system, fibrin. So there are these three proteins in this Yersinia pestis that help it really go to town and get started. And the deal is, where the flea bites you, your body responds by creating a little blood clot there, and then bringing in the immune system to help contain it. But this breaks down that fibrin, that blood clot, and it shoots it throughout the system. So now, I want to ask the girls or anybody else to jump in. What's the deal with what's the story about this flea and how it transmits? This is the other thing that might be related to the high mortality rate. How does the flea transmit the bacteria you're seeing? Go ahead. Okay.
So it gets into your blood, into the blood, and
It's a bloodsucker.
yeah.
Keep that in mind. That answers a lot of things. It's a bloodsucker. Like Todd said about mosquitoes. What happens is the replication of Yersinia takes place in the foregut. It's hard for us to see of a flea, but they're tiny, and it multiplies like crazy there. And the flea It's getting starved, isn't it? For blood, because it can't get through that down to the hindgut for processing the blood that it needs to live. So what does it do?
Gorgeous itself.
Bites and bites and bites. And all the fleas bites and bites. And as that progresses, synthetically add that up. As every flea the replication goes in the flea, all these fleas are biting and hungry. So they're going to leave any dying rats and infect other rats or whatever's around. And
So did the fleas die off too? Because they couldn't
They would have
get
died
their
off.
food, yeah.
I'm sorry?
They
So
would
the
have died
fleas
off.
died off
The
too?
fleas died off.
So
Yeah,
there
yeah.
was no need
Well,
of
see,
the-
but what happens is that, remember, there are reservoirs, as I pointed out here at Prairie Dog. Your cat that hunts these prairie dogs
Yeah.
could get transmitted, and apparently cats can also be a source of this under the right conditions.
Well,
And remember, the reservoirs for this are all these rodents who don't. They might get a little sick, but they don't die from it. That's why. And so it's all out there yet. And periodically, not assigned was another chapter. The next chapter after this, I believe, was all about subsequent outbreaks in China and India particularly. And you get that all the time. Just in 1994, India had an outbreak, 200,000 people panicking. They lost $2 to $3 billion in the first month because of all kinds of things weren't moving, goods, transportation systems. And remember what I said about culture in your model? The religion, says protect rats, so they're all running around. So once this gets loose into that population,
And
goes to town.
Yeah, and in poor areas of India, in the southern part, they actually eat rats. So they're still hunted. Yeah.
Yep.
So
I'm going to just show you one thing here, and maybe it'll be source of more discussion. And just maybe another way for us to put this in a visual sign. There's a field rodent. Top, marmot. Remember marmot stoles and marmot coats? Oh, that was all the fashion and rage in Europe. So that kept packing up and transporting, huh? Outdoor rat flea? Oh, we saw this the other day. Just something that's just amazing, isn't it? Rat fleas can survive, I think, Amanda mentioned it the other day, up to one of the two girls, 80 days without a host. So it's there, bacillus itself, 5 weeks in the future. So this is the normal route, and then the outdoor rat to indoor rat flea to humans.
How, what would you say would be the average, lifespan? I know it's gonna sound silly, of a flea. So I'm trying to figure out exactly how they. I'll get to my question. I'm just trying to figure out. What do you think? How long do you think they were able to live? Let's just say it says that they can go ahead and live 80 days without a host. And let's just say they go ahead and find another host before that 80 days, do a little blood sucking, go next, and keep doing it on and on. How long do you
They don't have a long life.
No, you don't think?
No.
So,
Not the flea. You're saying the fleas?
yeah.
Yeah, they don't. It's a few days.
Because I would figure that, because it almost seems like the bubonic plague, it almost was introduced by the fleas, but then once it just almost
Yeah, but fleas are reproducing
Oh, yeah.
all the time, and they reproduce fast. Not as fast as the bacteria.
Yeah.
This is just giving you a sense of proportion here. Day one, well, I think actually you can follow me. I'll just read that to you in case you can't read it wherever you are. Progression of the plague through a medieval household could be very rapid once the black rats that lived there became infected. An infected rat marked with a red dot on day 1 is shown to die from the disease by day 5. When that rat dies, its fleas leave. Yep, jumping up, pretty good jumper. They have hops,
6
carrying
feet.
the plague with them to other rats in the house. By day 10, these rats have also died, so it goes on. From the disease, and the fleas turn at that point to human beings. They're around. And remember, this hygiene that Sierra reminded us of, crowded, super crowded conditions, which is a case you'll always keep in mind for TB. Much of any epidemic disease has to do with crowdedness, and especially respiratory diseases. Let me just finish this. I'll get to the fleas at that turn to humans, affecting almost 75% of them. By day 15, approximately half of the humans in the household died from the plague. And
During
I
that
was
period
looking
of
for the
time, were
bottom.
there domestic dogs?
Sorry?
Were dogs domesticated at that point?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Dogs
So,
are probably
did
the
they-
oldest
Were they
domesticated.
ever affected? Were they ever affected by this?
I don't
that you're
recall
seeing as
ever
pesticides?
hearing anything
Yeah,
about dogs.
I don't care about either. Now that I think about it.
Just as we said the other day, there was a question about suspended animation of something. I think Todd was talking about that. That just go into this long period. Tuberculosis is one of those. It's suspended animation, and many of the viruses, particularly. But I don't recall ever reading. And so dogs just are not adapted. I don't know what it is. I don't know enough, but they apparently. I don't care. Joe?
So for anyone who's interested, you were talking about how like fleas jumping, they could jump 6 feet. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought I only read 24 inches, but
No,
six
well,
feet.
the flea's different. I mean, this is the
Yeah,
Oriental
that's what I was
flea.
thinking of.
This is the Oriental flea, and I think that's a little lower ceiling.
Oh.
But they transmit to human, the more what's called sometimes the human fleas too. That's another situation, isn't it?
That's so weird.
That's fine. Sorry.
Could I just
Go
add
ahead.
one more
Yes,
thing?
yes, please, wind up here.
Just one more thing also about the plague is that besides it being, a really devastating thing and, history basically, it also opened up doors to art. It also showed it also brought out an unfortunate thing, the flagellants. That's people whipping themselves, or it's sort of like the Mayans' way of sacrificing and to go ahead and show God that they're bloodletting to show that, hey, we need help here. So it's like it also brought out also the mass killing of Jews because they believe Jews poisoned the well, like you did say. And so there's so many different things besides just the mass, mortality of the plague itself that brought death as well.
There you go. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up. And we will take that particular issue and talk about it in the front end of Thursday's class. But then we will get rolling on smallpox, and the people that have at least the first 2 or 3 things need to think about just giving me a little bit, or guide yourself, and everybody be reading it, and we'll see how it works out. We're going forward here. Thanks for bringing that, because that's at the end of talking about some things that really were earth-shattering in terms of what it ushered in. We're going to basically, if anyone has anything to add today, but we didn't take a break yet, and I think this is a good place to basically break, unless you want to have a little more clarity. I finished up with agriculture, and I will try to run off some copies on those zoonoses just for interest reasons for you. Let me look over my notes in case that's just another comment there. You guys did a good job leading out, and I probably should not be having as much diarrhea of the mouth. But as we get going, I think we're all going to feel more comfortable with each other, and that's how any kind of group activity or spirit works, and so that we'll have hopefully more on Thursday than we even had today, which I was basically pretty happy. Everybody threw in a couple things. So I think that gives me, I think we covered a lot, and gives you the basic kind of things of the dynamics of this particular bacterium that raised heck in the world. I mean, when you start thinking half the population, about 450 million people live, best estimates demographically, were alive at this time. And about half of them, the population by 1360 had not, a few years after, sticks in my mind. We're down to, about 230 million people. That was it, and that's a lot of deaths. So we are indeed lucky to have moved on. We have faced other kind of issues today, but we moved on a bit give support to public health and here and there, and reasonable distribution of good nutrition and information and education around the world. That's the sad thing, because my final comment, I think Mario and I were talking, yes, we were talking before the class started here, about the resurgence of old diseases. That's the same thing. This stuff, tuberculosis, we thought about, when I first took my first disease and pathology class, must have been about 75. Day one, on the board, all these diseases, crossed them out. We're done with all those. We've moved beyond that. Now we have to deal with chronic stuff, diseases of affluence, diabetes, already was talking about then, heart disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease. Not true, because tuberculosis is always lodged somewhere in the world, often embedded in poverty and unsanitary, less than hygienic and low nutrition areas. Just waiting for opportunities. It's doing its thing of reproducing, as I put on the board that first day. It's playing its evolutionary role of success, of variants being produced to see which, so one's going to take off and the other one not. And the way we can control some of that is exactly what I talked about when I talked about cholera the first day, and that is by good hygienic, sanitary conditions, you can essentially kind of domesticate in favor of the less virulent, I should say, less virulent form. And so they out-reproduce. It's a fitness contest, and they out-reproduce the severe one. So we have to know that, have that knowledge. Okay, next time we'll come back and talk about religion influence and some of the other things that Amanda, thank you.
Right.
I think this is going to work. I feel pretty good about it, and after all, I'm the guy in charge, huh?
Now, you said there
Okay,
was
thanks. I really look forward to this class.
I had a quick question. You mentioned that there was a movie that
Called Contagion?
no.
Oh, the other one I'm going to show.
PBS one or something. What is that one?
The one I'm going to show?
Yeah. Just out of
The Great
curiosity.
Influenza, I think
Oh,
it's
I
called.
think I've seen that.
Yeah,
I think we did it
figured
for
that some of you have seen
epidemiology
it, but
class.
since we're going to be discussing that article, I thought it would be, it's one of the only DVDs that I think is
Yeah.
60 minutes long, so that still gives us 30 minutes to talk about that stuff.
Yeah,
All right, see you
had this-
Thursday, and
okay.
everybody knows their responsibilities?
Yes.
Okay, and I have mine. All right, just stick to that.
I swear they're trying to like, give us back problems with these,
All right.
these freaking
Thanks,
things, I
guys.
swear.
Yeah,
Bye.
be sure you hand me in those on Thursday,
Yeah.
your little summary page or outline, whatever you want to use.
Telling you, I'm convinced that these people that like
We're gonna
give us our
talk about
textbooks are trying to
just start putting up
give us
what
back.
and look at the religion.
Because
Because Islam quite differently dealt with that than Christianity. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and then get rolling on smallpox. Thank you, folks. I can't wait. I get here an hour early.
You're like, oh, let's
Sometimes
go.
I'm here. Yeah, no, I want to go. I feel good about you guys, you folks, and obviously I'm pretty into the material. There's a lot of other things I could
Well, see,
teach and
that's
probably
good.
get bigger classes, but tell me what I like. And after 30 years of, the standard with big classes, once 150.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Um,
Mine used to have mindset. Yeah.
No, I just have
No. You just can't.
big X.
Yes.
That's how this used to be really the pleasure field started with.
Tony died. Yeah. 20 years. Yeah.